In 1954, one film plunged audiences into the abyss, redefined the blockbuster, and proved that live-action fantasy was not just for B-movies. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea wasn't just a movie. It was a $5 million gamble that could have bankrupted Walt Disney. But beneath its Oscar-winning surface lie secrets of production chaos, pioneering technology, and one very, very stubborn giant squid. We are about to dive deep into 15 surprising facts you never knew about this aquatic masterpiece. If you love old Hollywood, classic film facts, and uncovering the magic behind the movies, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell right now. This channel is your new home for Golden Age cinema, and you won't want to miss what we explore next. Subscribe! All right, are you subscribed? Excellent! Let's begin the dive. Fact 1. This was Walt's biggest gamble. In the early 1950s, the name Walt Disney meant one thing: the undisputed king of animation. His studio had built its reputation on masterpieces like Snow White, Bambi, and Cinderella. His live-action ventures, while successful, were often co-productions filmed overseas, like Treasure Island. They were safe, smaller-scale films. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was something entirely different. This was not a side project. This was Walt deciding to compete directly with the biggest studios in Hollywood, MGM, Fox, Paramount, on their own turf. It was his first, all-in, 100% American-produced, live-action epic. And it came with a budget that made the entire industry gasp: $5 million. Walt today's money, that's over $55 million. It was one of the most expensive films ever made at the time, a budget that would make a major studio nervous. For a smaller, independent studio like Disney, it was a bet the farm moment. But here is the real kicker. This massive gamble wasn't happening in a vacuum. At the exact same time, Walt was pouring every penny he had into a seemingly insane dream project in Anaheim, California, Disneyland. The park was draining his finances, and the studio's capital was tied up in both ventures. The two projects were financially intertwined. If 20,000 Leagues had sunk at the box office, it wouldn't have just been a red mark in a ledger. It would have been a financial catastrophe, likely stalling or even completely killing the project that would become the happiest place on Earth. The entire future of the Disney empire, as we know it, was riding on this one underwater epic. Fact 2. The dry for wet illusion. You'd assume logically that a film with Under the Sea in its title would be filmed primarily in the ocean. And while 20,000 Leagues did pioneer real underwater cinemascope photography in the Bahamas, which we'll get to, many of its most famous sequences were a stunning technical illusion. When you see Captain Nemo and his crew walking in procession on the seabed, they are not in the water. They are on a massive, meticulously dressed soundstage at the Disney studio, and they are completely dry. This was a classic and perfected technique known as dry for wet. So how did they fake it so perfectly? It was a masterful cocktail of 5 different effects. First, the set. It was built on a soundstage, dressed with lava rock formations, sand, and fake seaweed. Second, the atmosphere. The stage was pumped full of dust and light smoke, which, when lit by the powerful lamps, created the illusion of particulate, the murky, floating particles you always see underwater. Third, the motion. The entire scene was filmed in slow motion. This is the most crucial part. It automatically gives the actors' movements a heavy, dreamlike quality that perfectly mimics the resistance and drag of water. Fourth, the lighting. The set was lit through heavy blue and green filters. This not only colored the scene, but also simulated the way water absorbs the red end of the light spectrum at depth. And finally, the current. Hidden off-screen, powerful wind machines, fans, were aimed at the set. This made the actors' oxygen hoses and the fake seaweed drift and sway as if moved by a gentle deep-sea current. Fact 3, the groundbreaking real underwater scenes. But for the scenes that dry for wet simply couldn't fake, the dangerous shark encounter, Ned and Conseil's first dive, the crew hunting for treasure, Walt Disney demanded authenticity. He wanted his audiences to see the real ocean, and he wanted to show it in the most spectacular way possible, CinemaScope. In 1953, this was a revolutionary, almost insane proposition. CinemaScope was the hot new widescreen technology, but its anamorphic lenses and the cameras that held them were bulky, expensive, and delicate. It was designed exclusively for dry land. No one had ever successfully taken this complex system underwater for a feature film. So Disney's engineers had to invent the solution. They designed and built a completely custom Goliath waterproof housing. It was a 1,000-pound, 450-kilogram behemoth of steel and thick-gauge plexiglass, which had to be strong enough to withstand the pressure while also allowing a cameraman, sealed inside, to operate the camera's focus and aperture. The crew, led by underwater specialist Till Gabani, took this massive rig to the crystal-clear waters of Nassau in the Bahamas. Every single shot they captured was a world first. When audiences in 1954 saw those vast, sun-dappled underwater vistas for the first time in glorious panoramic widescreen, it wasn't just watching the ocean, it felt like being in it. This staggering technical achievement is a huge reason the film won its Oscar for special effects. Fact 4, the Nautilus viewport trick. Arguably the most mesmerizing and iconic shots in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea are those from within the Nautilus's Grand Salon. We see Captain Nemo brooding at his organ, or Kirk Douglas plotting his escape, all while the wonders of the deep drift past the massive cast-iron viewport. The immediate challenge for director Richard Fleischer was how to realistically composite the actors inside the set with the ocean life outside. The standard 1950s solution would have been rear projection, that is, filming the actors against a screen that was playing pre-recorded footage of fish. But this method often looked flat, grainy, and fake. The lighting never quite matched, and the actors often looked like paper cutouts. For a $5 million epic, flat and fake was not an option for Walt Disney. The solution, devised by the special effects department, was a stroke of practical, in-camera genius. It wasn't rear projection at all. The massive viewport on the salon set was simply a large, open hole. The camera was placed outside the set, looking in at James Mason and the other actors. Then, right in front of the camera's lens, between the camera and the actors, they placed a custom-built, very narrow glass water tank. This thin aquarium was filled with water, some prop seaweed, and real tiny fish, mostly minnows. Because this tank was so close to the camera, the laws of focal depth did the rest. The camera focused on the actors behind the tank, causing the tiny fish in the foreground to swim in and out of focus. This created a perfect, multi-layered illusion. The fish looked like distant, large creatures drifting by in the deep, and the water in the tank added a subtle, authentic-looking shimmer. So, when you see Captain Nemo profoundly staring into the deep, he is, in reality, just staring through a minnow tank. That's true Disney magic. Fact 5. The designer of the Nautilus wasn't an engineer. The Nautilus is, without question, one of the most famous and influential vehicles in film history. It's a character in its own right, a perfect blend of Victorian-era technology, Gothic menace, and brutalist power. But the man who designed it, Harper Goff, was not a naval architect. He wasn't an engineer. He wasn't even a full-time Disney employee at the time. He was a multi-talented artist, a musician, and a set designer whom Walt Disney had befriended in a London model train shop. When Walt tasked him with designing the submarine, Goff ignored the simple description in Jules Verne's novel. He knew the Nautilus had to be more than just a tube. It had to be an expression of Captain Nemo's brilliant, civilized, and deeply rage-filled mind. So Goff went to the ocean for inspiration. He famously combined the sleek, dangerous body of a shark with the prehistoric plated armor of a crocodile. He envisioned it as a sea monster. The hull was covered in heavy iron plates and protruding rivets, not to be hydrodynamic, but to look like the scarred, tough hide of a beast. He added a long serrated dorsal fin, a powerful tail, and the two iconic, glowing yellow eyes of the salon viewports, which made the submarine look terrifyingly alive as it hunted its prey. Goff's monster design was so effective, so believable, that for decades after the film's release, the US Navy would receive mail from hopeful inventors, all referencing Goff's design. They had created a fantasy so powerful, it felt real. Fact 6. The giant squid failed. Miserably. The entire film builds to one monumental climax. The battle with the giant squid. The studio spent an unprecedented $250,000, a staggering 25% of the entire special effects budget, just on building the monster. It was an animatronic marvel for 1954, a 40-foot-long, 2-ton beast of steel, foam rubber, and coiled spring tentacles, all operated by a complex web of hydraulics, electronics, and compressed air. The crew, led by effects supervisor Ob Iwerks, staged the battle in the massive Stage 3 tank at the Disney studio. The original plan was to film the scene at dusk. The director, Richard Fleischer, believed this would be the most beautiful and eerie time. He envisioned the monster's silhouette rising from a calm, flat, twilight sea. So, they shot it exactly that way. The actors thrashed, the Nautilus set was battered, and the massive rubber squid was raised and lowered on cue. When Walt Disney came to review the dailies, he sat in silence. The scene finished, the lights came up, and Walt was furious. The problem? It was too perfect. The calm water, the clear dusk light. You could see everything. You could see the hydraulic arms, the rubber skin, the wires pulling the tentacles, and the machinery lifting the monster. It had no weight, no menace. It looked exactly like what it was, an expensive, mechanical puppet splashing in a swimming pool. Walt famously stood up and said, "It looks like a puppet show." The entire $250,000 sequence, the climax of his $5 million epic, was a complete and total disaster. Fact 7. Walt's $250,000 fix. After the disastrous screening of the puppet show Squid, panic set in. The production was already over budget and behind schedule. Director Richard Fleischer and his team were demoralized. They had filmed the scene exactly as scripted, and it had failed. They were stuck. They had no idea how to fix it. Walt Disney, frustrated, took a weekend to think. When he returned to the studio, he had the solution. A single idea that would not only save the sequence, but turn it into one of the most iconic monster battles in cinema history. He told his team, reshoot the entire thing, but this time, have it take place during a violent storm at night. This was a stroke of absolute genius. The new concept solved every single problem the first version had. First, the darkness. By setting it at night, they could use harsh, dramatic, selective lighting. This meant they only lit what they wanted the audience to see. A thrashing tentacle here, a terrified face there. All the wires, hydraulics, and machinery could be hidden in the deep, inky shadows. Second, the storm. Walt ordered in massive wind machines and dump tanks. The once calm, clear water was now a raging, chaotic tempest. This churning water and crashing spray further obscured the mechanics and, crucially, gave the squid a sense of terrifying, uncontrollable power and weight. Finally, the chaos allowed the actors to give bigger, more desperate performances. It was no longer a fight. It was a struggle for survival. It cost another fortune to rebuild parts of the set and restage the entire battle. But Walt was right. This new version was visceral, terrifying, and completely believable. He had turned a $250,000 failure into a $250,000 masterpiece, all by adding a little movie magic. In this case, wind, water, and darkness. Fact 8. Kirk Douglas, the musician. In the midst of all this deep-sea dread, scientific marvel, and brooding mystery, the film suddenly bursts into a moment of pure, rollicking joy. The song, A Whale of a Tale, is an unforgettable highlight, but it was never supposed to be in the movie. It was added for one reason: Kirk Douglas. By 1954, Douglas was one of the biggest stars on the planet. He was famous for playing intense, brooding, often troubled characters. But he was also a charismatic and physically commanding screen presence. When he read the script, Douglas felt his character, Ned Land, the master harpooner, was too one-dimensional. Ned was simply the action guy, the cynical counterpoint to Nemo's intellectualism. Douglas worried the character was flat and unlikable, just a tough guy who complained a lot. He wanted a way to instantly show the audience Ned's other side, that he was a charming, larger-than-life rogue, a sailor's sailor who could win over a crowd. What better way than with a sea shanty? So, Douglas himself commissioned the song from the film's writers, Lawrence and Foster. He learned the ukulele and performed it with all the high-wattage charisma he was famous for. It was a brilliant move. The song not only defined Ned Land's character in under 3 minutes, but also provided a vital moment of levity and fun. It's the perfect spoonful of sugar to balance the film's dark, gothic tone, and it's impossible to imagine the movie without it. Fact 9. The adorable seal was a last-minute addition. One of the most enduring and beloved characters in the film isn't human at all. It's Esmeralda, Captain Nemo's playful and intelligent pet seal. She is the source of the film's only real warmth and humor inside the Nautilus, acting as Nemo's loyal aquatic companion. But if you went looking for her in Jules Verne's original 1870 novel, you wouldn't find her. Esmeralda is not in the book. In fact, she wasn't even in the original screenplay. She was a very late addition by the screenwriter, Earl Felton. As the script developed, the filmmakers realized they had a serious problem. Captain Nemo, as written, was too dark. He was a brooding, isolated, and obsessive genius, consumed by a quest for vengeance. He was brilliant, yes, but he was also cold and, frankly, a little scary. The audience needed a way to connect with him emotionally. They needed to see a sliver of the humanity that still existed beneath his tragic exterior. Esmeralda was the solution. She was, quite literally, designed to steal scenes and act as a living, emotional bridge between the captain and the audience. Her unconditional affection for Nemo and his gentle paternal care for her instantly showed the audience that this man was not a monster. It revealed a capacity for love and tenderness that his human crew, all equally stoic and serious, could not. The seal, which was a real, trained animal from a circus, was so effective that she became a central part of the film's heart. Proving that even in the darkest depths of the ocean, there's always room for a little charm. Fact 10. Captain Nemo's uncomfortable eye. One of the most powerful and unsettling elements of James Mason's performance is his stare. There's an intensity to his eyes, a wild, hypnotic quality that makes him seem both brilliant and dangerously unhinged. This was a very deliberate, and for the actor, very painful special effect. To give Nemo this man who has seen the abyss look, the filmmakers decided to alter one of his eyes, making him appear just slightly off. Mason was fitted with a single large contact lens. This wasn't just for color, it was designed to catch the light in a strange way, giving his gaze an unnatural, almost predatory glint. It created a subtle asymmetry that is deeply unsettling to the human brain. But this was 1954. We're not talking about modern, soft, breathable lenses. The lens Mason had to wear was a thick, rigid piece of plastic, an early scleral lens that was notoriously difficult to wear. James Mason reportedly hated it. It was extremely uncomfortable, irritated his eye, and made his vision blurry. But he endured it because the effect was so powerful. Film historians and crew members still debate the exact color of the lens. Some remember it as a sickly, sulfur yellow. Others as a fiery, reddish orange. Whatever the exact shade, it worked. It visually separated Nemo from the other men. While they were just visitors, his ocean eye made him look like he belonged to the deep. A man who was no longer entirely human, but a true creature of the sea. Fact 11. Defying the censors with cannibals. One of the film's most intense and frightening sequences is the crew's encounter on the island of New Guinea, where they are attacked and chased by a tribe of cannibals. It's a classic, thrilling action set piece. But in 1954, this scene was considered so racially and politically explosive that it nearly got the entire film censored. At the time, all Hollywood films were subject to the iron-fisted rule of the production code, run by Joseph Breen. The Breen office had the power to edit any film or shut it down completely. And when they reviewed the script for 20,000 Leagues, they had a massive problem with the New Guinea scene. Their official objection was twofold. First, they stated that the film's portrayal of savages was racist and derogatory. Second, and more importantly to them, the code strictly forbade portraying white men as being defeated or overpowered by non-white characters. The image of Kirk Douglas and his crew running for their lives from a native tribe was a direct violation of this racist cinematic supremacy rule. The Breen office demanded the entire sequence be cut. Walt Disney, however, refused to budge. His story team, in a brilliant move, didn't argue about racism. They argued about plot logic. They sent a letter back to the censors, cleverly reframing the action. They argued that the islanders weren't being portrayed as savages. Instead, they were defending their home from strange, unknown invaders in metal suits, which was a perfectly reasonable thing to do. And as for the chase, Disney's team pointed out that the white men weren't defeated. They argued that the crew fired the first shot by resisting, and in the end, they escaped and successfully repelled the islanders using the Nautilus's superior technology. This clever bit of legalistic jujitsu worked. The censors reluctantly approved the scene, and one of the film's most memorable moments was saved. Fact 12. Nemo was darker in the book. The Captain Nemo we see in Disney's film is one of cinema's greatest anti-heroes. He's a tragic figure, a scientific genius who has exiled himself from humanity. We learn he is driven by revenge against a government that, as he puts it, tortured my wife and my son to death. This clear, understandable motive makes him sympathetic. We feel his pain, even as we fear his rage. But the Captain Nemo created by Jules Verne in the 1870 novel was a far more terrifying and enigmatic figure. Verne's Nemo was, in a word, a terrorist. While he was still a brilliant aristocrat who had fled civilization, his motives were kept almost entirely secret. He wasn't just sinking ships of war, he was sinking any ship from his hated, unnamed nation, often with a cold, ruthless lack of remorse. More importantly, his identity was a complete mystery. The book never reveals his true name, his country of origin, or the specific tragedy that drove him to the sea. The reader is left to guess. Was he Polish, resisting Russian oppression? an Indian prince, fighting back against the British Empire. It wasn't until a sequel, The Mysterious Island, that Verne finally revealed Nemo was Prince Dakar, an Indian royal whose family was killed by the British during the Indian Rebellion of 1857. Disney's screenwriters knew that this level of ambiguity wouldn't work for a 1950s blockbuster. They needed their $5 million star to have a clear, relatable, and emotionally powerful backstory. So, they streamlined the character. They kept his genius and his quest for vengeance, but gave him a specific, personal tragedy. This decision transformed him from a cold, political enigma into a classic, heartbreaking, Byronic hero. Fact 13. That incredible organ wasn't a prop. If the Nautilus has a soul, this is it. The magnificent Gothic pipe organ is the centerpiece of Captain Nemo's salon. It's the voice of his genius, his refinement, and his thunderous rage. In any other Hollywood production of the 1950s, an object this elaborate would have been a prop shell, a beautiful, silent piece of set dressing. Actors would simply mime playing it, and the music would be added later. But good enough was not a phrase Walt Disney tolerated. That organ was real. Well, mostly. While the towering shark-tooth-like pipes were decorative, the console and keyboard were a fully functional, custom-built electronic organ integrated directly into the set. When James Mason pressed those keys, it made music. And speaking of James Mason, he was a decent amateur pianist, but he was not a concert organist capable of mastering Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor, one of the most famously difficult pieces ever written. To ensure complete authenticity, Mason meticulously learned the exact fingering for the passages he's seen playing. He practiced until his hands and body language perfectly matched the music he was supposed to be creating. So, when you watch the film, you are seeing a hybrid of real skill and movie magic. The hands and the passionate performance belong to James Mason, who is genuinely playing the instrument. But the flawless, thunderous, and technically perfect audio that fills the theater, that was dubbed in later by a professional, anonymous organist, giving Nemo the godlike musical power his character deserved. It's a perfect blend of performance and production. Here is that 14th fact, expanded to a 300-word script segment. Fact 14. The film won 2 Oscars. When 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was released at Christmas time in 1954, it wasn't just a hit, it was a phenomenon. It was the second highest grossing film of the year, second only to White Christmas. Walt Disney's $5 million gamble had paid off, saving the studio and securing the future of Disneyland. But its success wasn't just financial, it was also a massive critical and technical achievement, and the Hollywood establishment had to acknowledge it. The film was nominated for 3 Academy Awards and won 2, in the exact categories that represented its greatest triumphs. First, it won Best Special Effects. This was the Academy's validation of everything: the dry for wet illusion, the pioneering underwater cinemascope rig, and of course, that brilliantly reshot, storm-tossed giant squid. The film had pushed the boundaries of what was technically possible in a way no one had ever seen. Second, it won Best Art Direction, Color. This Oscar honored the incredible, immersive world the designers had built from scratch. It was for Harper Goff's menacing Nautilus exterior. It was for the opulent, Victorian Gothic salon, with its plush carpets, specimen cases, and that magnificent organ. And it was for the grim, industrial engine rooms. The artists hadn't just built sets, they had built a complete, believable, lived-in world that perfectly reflected the mind of its creator, Captain Nemo. The film's 3rd nomination was for Best Film Editing, but its 2 wins cemented its legacy. It had proven that a fantasy or adventure film could be just as artful and just as technically brilliant as any serious Hollywood drama. Here is that 15th and final fact, expanded to a 300-word script segment. Fact 15. The Nautilus lived on at Disneyland. Walt Disney's massive gamble had paid off. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was a box office smash, and just 7 months after its release, Disneyland opened its gates in July 1955. The two projects, once financially tied in a do-or-die struggle, were now linked in success. Walt, being the ultimate showman, saw a golden opportunity. He had spent a fortune building the most incredible, detailed, and immersive sets in Hollywood history. Why let them rot in a studio warehouse? In a move that would define the synergy of the Disney company, Walt had the original, screen-used Nautilus interior sets, the Grand Salon, the chart room, the diving chamber, painstakingly moved from the studio lot and permanently installed in Disneyland's Tomorrowland. It wasn't a ride, it was a walk-through attraction. For the first time, guests could physically step out of the real world and into the movie they loved. They could stand where Kirk Douglas stood, marvel at the giant viewport, and even sit at Captain Nemo's magnificent organ, which was rigged to play the toccata and fugue. To complete the experience, a portion of the giant squid, rescued from the studio tank, was put on display in a mock ocean setting. This attraction was one of the park's original e-ticket level experiences and remained incredibly popular for 11 years. From 1955 to 1966, it was the ultimate cross-promotion, allowing millions of people to literally step inside the magic of the movies, cementing the Nautilus not just as a film prop, but as a genuine cultural icon. So, from a £1,000 camera rig that had never been used underwater to a $250,000 squid that had to be completely reshot, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was so much more than just a movie. It was a declaration. It was a declaration by Walt Disney that his studio was not just for animation, that it could build worlds of any shape, size, or depth. He proved that a fantasy film could be an A-list epic, packed with breathtaking artistry, groundbreaking special effects, and a complex, tragic hero for the ages. It didn't just set the standard for blockbusters, it created the template. Every epic adventure that followed, from Jaws to Star Wars to Avatar, owes a profound debt to the risks Walt took and the world his artists built, deep beneath the waves. But now, I want to hear from you. What is the one fact about this film that surprised you the most? Was it the drive for wet illusion? The story of the disastrous first squid? Or James Mason's painful contact lens? Let me know your thoughts and your suggestions in the comments below. Your ideas are what drive this channel. If you enjoyed this deep dive and you love old Hollywood, please consider subscribing and joining our community of classic film lovers. Thank you so much for watching.